Dasya Gyanjana Shalakaya Chakshurum Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Rati Swapadantikam Vandeyam Shri Guru Shri Yuta Padakamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavamsha Shri Rupam Sagadatam Sahagana Raghunatam Vikamtam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Parijanasaitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sagana Lalita Shri Vishaka Vitamstra He Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dinabandhu Jagapate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostate Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Vanchakalpa Trubhyascha Kripa Sindhu Bevacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Namo Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prasthaya Bhutale Shrimate Bhaktivedanta Swami Niti Namine Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschatya Deshatarine Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadara Shri Vasadi Gaura Bhaktivinoda Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, everyone. So, welcome to our continued study of this most wonderful Bhagavad Gita. We're reading from chapter 12, which is entitled, 13, which is entitled The Nature, the Enjoyer, and Consciousness. So Arjuna has opened this chapter with questions that Krishna is now answering. And he has explained so far the kshetra, the field, that is the body that we all acquire through our interactions with the modes of material nature. And separate from the body, he has explained that there are two knowers of the body. And those two knowers are the jiva and the super soul. So this knowledge that we are acquiring, it is very important for us. And so now in the 8th through 12th verses, Krishna is going to explain how to acquire this real knowledge, because this knowledge is what gives us truly perfection of life. And so Krishna here now in the 8th through 12th verse is giving 20 items that are meant to untangle us from the material existence in acquiring knowledge. Okay, so we'll read the verse. Humility, pridelessness, non-violence, tolerance, simplicity, approaching a bona fide spiritual master, wife and home, and the rest, even-mindedness amid pleasant and unpleasant events, constant and unalloyed devotion to me, aspiring to live in a solitary place, detachment from the general mass of people, accepting the importance of self-realization, and philosophical search for the absolute truth. All these I declare to be knowledge. And besides this, whatever there may be, is ignorance. So, Krishna is giving this important understanding of these 20 items, which are the process and qualities for acquiring knowledge. And Vishnu Chakravarti Thakur explains that 17 of these are meant for both the devotees and the jnanis. And the last two, accepting the importance of self-realization and philosophical search for the absolute truth, the last two are meant for the jnanis themselves alone. And number 16 in this list, which is constant and unalloyed devotion to me, that's number 16, that is meant only for the devotees. So 17 apply to both jnanis and devotees. The last two apply only to the jnanis. And number 16 is unalloyed devotion that applies to the devotees. So this is the real process for knowledge. And some of these are like qualities, like tolerance or simplicity. And these are qualities that are favorable for advancement in knowledge. And some are a process or an activity, like accepting or approaching a guru. But these are all geared towards obtaining knowledge. And Prabhupada clarifies in the purport, right in the very beginning, that this process of knowledge has nothing to do with the kshetra, the body, the 24 elements. It's actually the exact opposite. It is knowledge to how to get free from this body. And that's what makes it the real knowledge. Krishna says, besides this, whatever there may be is ignorance. So that's a very exclusive statement Krishna is making. So we have to understand, how can that be the case? What it means is that all this knowledge we may acquire, we may go to the top universities in the world, but that knowledge simply teaches us how to eat nicely, sleep nicely, mate nicely, and defend nicely. Simply how to interact with the 24 elements of the body, of this kshetra. So all that knowledge, it's simply to satisfy our material senses. And that knowledge doesn't give us the path to real happiness, to perfection of life. And so thus, Krishna is saying that all other, it's just ignorance. Because it'll keep one in ignorance, not knowing their real identity as servant of Krishna. So that is the exclusive nature of this type of knowledge. And of these, which is most important? It is unalloyed devotion, constant and unalloyed devotion to me. Of the 20 articles here, number 16, it is the most important. Because if unalloyed devotion doesn't manifest, the others have no real value. That's what Prabhupada says in the purport. There is no real value, to being humble or nonviolence. If one remains humble or nonviolent on the bodily platform, there is no real value. So all of these must be connected ultimately to unalloyed devotional service. Right? If it doesn't end in bhakti, then we haven't actually accomplished much. So this number 16, it is the critical aspect of where we must bring all of these different qualities to. Right? And so, at the end of the purport, Prabhupada talks about, but we may wonder, well, how to develop these, different qualities and processes. Do we have to go to school to acquire them? So we understand that we don't have to endeavor independently to bring these out. Simply that by doing devotional service, all of these will manifest. The ability to be humble, simple, have some detachment, aspire for this self-realization. All of these manifest by the process of devotional service. So by doing unalloyed devotional service, it is the all-in-one process and makes all of these very, very achievable. Right? And so, one may ask, if unalloyed devotion is, the most important and the central point, then what is the importance of understanding these other 19? If they're going to automatically develop, why do I need to even know these other 19? Right? That might be a logical question. So, Krishna is explaining these because we should become aware. What is it that I'm trying to develop? So as they start to manifest in my nature, I can understand them and realize, these are the desirable qualities, desirable things that should be happening. And by understanding them, we can try to help, solidify them. So yes, they will come by the practice of bhakti, but still we should be aware of these other qualities and processes so that we can become, we can help solidify them as we progress in our purification process towards unalloyed devotional service. So that is the importance of understanding them. Though they'll come singularly by the practice of bhakti, we should still become aware of them. So we need to understand what these mean in some detail. Of course, we won't discuss all of these in detail here, but we'll just touch on a few of them. Humility. Prabhupada says that humility means one should not be anxious to have the satisfaction of being honored by others. He says this in the second paragraph. So humility is so key. It is the first step in our process, right? Chaitanya Mahaprabhu said, Tradapi sunichena tarorapi sahishna mani namanadena kirtaniya sadahari. To do kirtaniya, to do it always, that one must be humble. Right? So not desiring the satisfaction of others. To think oneself equal to God is not humble. So the self-realized soul, they're not caring about honor or dishonor. They're just simply understanding their position. And Prabhupada elsewhere talks about humility. Humility means is to have an accurate understanding of who I am. To know I am part and parcel of Krishna. That is humility. It is not about low self-esteem. It is not about thinking oneself incapable. It is simply understanding I am part and parcel of Krishna. Whatever ability I have, if it is extraordinary, it is due to the grace of Krishna. It is happening only by Krishna's will. So humility does not mean weak or low self-esteem or one who does not accomplish great things. Actually, the most humble can accomplish the greatest of things. So if we're convinced we are part and parcel of Krishna, then we have humility. And so we need this in order to chant the holy names of the Lord. How we'll reach out to the Supreme Lord if we are convinced in our own foolishness that we are sufficient, right? So, sorry, I forgot to advance the slides. This is a little bit about humility. Accepting a guru. Srila Prabhupada says in the purport that transcendental life begins when one accepts a bona fide spiritual master. Actually, our spiritual life begins in the process of accepting a spiritual master. When we say initiation, it's initiate, to begin something. Sometimes, initiate, we treat it, now I've arrived, I'm all set, I'm complete. No, it is only the beginning of the process. So accepting a guru is very, very important in the process of acquiring this knowledge. One of the ones that we sometimes wonder, scratch our head about, think, when it says detachment from the entanglement with family. Oh, what does this mean? Does this mean that I cannot engage in family life? No, that is not the purport. The purport of this means that one should engage one's family in Krishna consciousness. That one should become mother and father for the purpose of delivering Krishna's lost children back to him. So our role in family life is to become attached to their practice of devotional service. So this is the understanding. It doesn't mean abandoning family. That is actually contrary to the principles Krishna has laid out. In Grihastha Ashram, one has a great responsibility, but it is done in the understanding of one's Krishna consciousness. Ahimsa, non-violence. We think of non-violence in often more grotesque terms, slitting the throat of an animal. That is non-violence. But non-violence goes even further. It means not to put anybody in distress. Not just killing, but sometimes our words with others put somebody in distress. That is a fact of violence. We are creating a disturbance for somebody. So maybe we may not be creating physical disturbance, but we may be creating emotional disturbance. So a devotee is very careful not to create disturbances in the minds of anybody. And they're very thoughtful about the words they choose to use. Because yes, physical violence we are very familiar with. But ahimsa actually is much more broader than that. We see this false ego. False ego means to have a false understanding of who I am. But real ego is there. Prabhupada says You must have ego because there is some concept of I am. Ego means I am. So I am something. What am I? Part and parcel of Krishna. So false ego means when I have some different understanding that I am independent of Krishna, or I am the controller, or I am this or that. That is false ego. We are in the process of awakening real ego, which is I am part and parcel of Krishna. So ego is important. Birth, death, old age, and disease. Knowing about that, if we don't understand the difficulties of this, we'll make no endeavor to get out of it. So these are just some. There are many others in here. We have some discussions on Facebook and YouTube if anybody's interested in just exploring these more deeply. Spent about 4 or 5 weeks on these different topics very recently. So you can explore those if you like. But this overall, Prabhupada ends the purport by talking about this process. It's like a staircase from the beginning of humility all the way up to the top, which is unalloyed devotion. These are like a staircase. So one must reach the top in order to have value for each of the steps in that staircase. And again, it starts with humility. So nothing can start without humility. One must, acknowledge their position as part and parcel of Krishna. Okay? So now we'll move on to 13. I shall now explain the knowable, knowing which you will taste the eternal. Brahman, the spirit, beginningless and subordinate to me, lies beyond the cause and effect of this material world. So now in the next 7 verses, Krishna is going to speak about this Gaya, the object of knowledge. So he's talked about Kshetra, the Kshetrajna, the knower of the Kshetra. And now he's speaking about Gaya, the object of knowledge. What is it that I should know? So here Krishna explains what happens when one follows the process of knowledge. They understand this, the object of knowledge, the knowable. Right? So they understand this. And there are 2 knowables, the jiva and the supersoul. So there are 2 objects of knowledge. Just as there are 2 knowers, the Kshetrajna, there are 2. There are also 2 objects of knowledge, the jiva and the supersoul. And this verse is speaking of Brahman, right? Brahman, the spirit, beginningless. So we know that Brahman is a broad term. It includes Prakriti, nature. It includes the jiva. And it includes the supersoul. So actually everything ultimately is Brahman. Krishna's energy, para Shakti. Right? So which Brahman? We know there's Para Brahman, the supreme Brahman. But this Brahman is referring to the jiva. And how do we know? Because Krishna says, subordinate to me. So that is a clear indication. Krishna here is speaking about the living entity, the jiva. Okay? And because it is subordinate to Krishna. So this is the first object of knowledge, to know the spirit soul. And Prabhupada writes in this purport very sweetly, because what is the result of knowing these 2 objects of knowledge? Right? What's in it for me? We sometimes wonder. So Prabhupada says in the 4th line of the purport, by knowledge of the knower, both the soul and the supersoul, one can relish the nectar of life. Isn't that what we're all trying to do? Relish the nectar of life? Well, this is how it is experienced. By knowing the soul and the supersoul. That is the key to unlimited bliss. Happiness. Right? So until one comes to know this, one will not find real, eternal, permanent happiness. Why? Because when we know soul and supersoul, we can rise above this material nature, which is full of birth and death, old age, disease, adhyatmika, adibautika, adidevik, so many difficulties. So how to get free of it? One must know the soul and its relationship to the supersoul. It leads one to devotional service. And the result of devotional service is unlimited eternal bliss and happiness. So this is the means to truly relish the nectar of life, one must understand the soul and the supersoul. These two objects of knowledge. If you just know soul, it's not complete. So one must know both Gyayas. And Krishna now will transition here in a second. One final comment. We see this word anadi, beginningless. And Prabhupada talks about, one cannot trace out the origin of the soul. What is my birth date? When did it appear? It is beginningless. It's eternal. It's not something we can really comprehend with our material minds, because everything we have experience with has a beginning and an end. So we want to apply a beginning and end to everything. But the spirit soul, it is beginningless. But let us not forget, though it is eternal, though it is beginningless, it is subordinate to Krishna. And knowing the subordinate position of the soul, one can taste the eternal. What does that mean, taste the eternal? Again, that bliss, the happiness of eternal life in devotional service to Krishna. Okay. Next, now Krishna is going to speak about the super soul. The next 5 verses, Krishna is going to speak about the second object of knowledge, the second Gyaya, and that is the super soul. Everywhere are his hands and legs, his eyes, head, and faces, his ears everywhere. In this way, the super soul exists, pervading everything. So, here Krishna is explaining the position of the super soul. And Prabhupada in the purports is making sure we understand this is not describing the jiva. Many, commentators try to explain that this is referring to the jiva. The jiva is everywhere. But we know with very practical understanding that is not the case. Okay? So very clearly, it is being spoken about the super soul, and Krishna will conclude that in the 18th verse. But by the mercy of Prabhupada, in all these purports, he is reminding us of this nature. So the super soul is all-pervading. From Brahma down to the ant, all the flowers, plants, trees, Paramatma is present everywhere. It's pervading everything. And despite being so far away in the spiritual world, he is present with all of us. And can even accept our offerings. How someone far away, if you want to cook a meal for someone in India, can you do it? No. But for Krishna, though he is residing far away in Goloka Vrindavan, if you cook a meal for him, he can accept it. Why? Because of this. He is present everywhere. He's all-pervading. So the all-pervading, it has a very practical implication. And the analogy Prabhupada makes in the purport is of the sun. The sun is diffusing light, unlimited light rays, all over. Though it is situated 90 million miles away, 93 to be exact. Its presence is felt everywhere. So similarly, though Krishna is in the spiritual world, his presence is felt everywhere. Right? So it is truly all-pervading. And the practical implication of that is, one can have, interaction. We can offer a meal to Krishna, and he can accept it. So this is the second Brahman. Prabhupada again clarifies in the purport that this reference is to the super soul and not the jiva. The jiva is limited. Are your eyes and hands everywhere? You cannot even see what is in the next room, let alone the next planet or universe. But super soul is present everywhere and has complete knowledge. So we know very clearly by our own practical experience that our eyes and hands and legs are not everywhere. So this is without doubt referring to the super soul, though some commentators try to establish this as reference to the living entity. 15. The super soul is the original source of all senses, yet he is without senses. He is unattached, although he is the maintainer of all living beings. He transcends the modes of nature, and at the same time he is the master of all the modes of material nature. So here we see, some very important statements that we must understand clearly. So what is the meaning that the super soul has no senses? Does it mean he's impersonal? No. Prabhupada again, very emphatically is making that statement. It means that he has no material senses. Nirguna means material senses. But he has eyes and arms. You know, Prabhupada says, otherwise, how he can see? Of course he has eyes, but they are spiritual. So our senses are material, mechanical, right? In order for our eye to work, there are different muscles that must work together. Different signals must be transmitted through different, sort of conduits and processed in the brain. There's movement. It's all mechanical. And we know if something mechanical in the eye starts to break, the function of the eye doesn't work. That's material. But Krishna's eyes are spiritual. It means there's no machinery. They are eternal. In Krishna's body, there is no intestines and organs and blood flow. That's the machinery. Krishna's body and form is purely spiritual. Right? So when something is broken in our machinery, it stops working. But that is not the case of Krishna's senses. They're perfect because there's no machinery established with it. Right? So Krishna, as Super Soul, he has all senses. They're spiritual. Right? And Prabhupada says in the purport that his senses are so perfect, he can see even past, present, and future. So, yes, Krishna has senses, but he has no material senses. They are fully spiritual. And Prabhupada gives us a very sweet statement that the jiva, the living entity, also has spiritual senses. Our senses are originally spiritual, but they have been covered by the material elements. But when we purify from that material contamination, we'll also see the Lord's form described here. Sometimes we wonder, how I cannot see Krishna. I want to see the all-pervading nature. It's there, but one's eyes must be purified to be able to see. And so, when one practices devotional service, those material senses become purified, and one regains their original spiritual senses. Two more comments I'll make here before we move on. Very interesting statement here that Krishna is saying that he is unattached. The Super Soul is unattached. Krishna is maintaining and creating so many things, yet he remains unattached. We, when we create one small home, or one small company, or one small family, we become so attached by that creation and maintenance. But Krishna is so powerful that though he is maintaining everything with great love and care, he remains unattached. It means he's unaffected. So when Krishna tells us to transcend, to be equipoised, have equanimity, Krishna himself is possessing this same dynamic. Remember, Krishna never asks us to do anything that he himself is not doing. That is the beauty of a two-way loving relationship. It is not a one-way street. Final comment is remembering that the Super Soul is present in all of us. He knows everything that we do. Everything that we're happening. He's the perfect observer. Sometimes we stress out, or have anxiety about, we're doing something and, maybe someone else is not noticing, we're not getting credit for it, or, someone doesn't know that this thing went awry, but I really tried my best. I didn't mean to make this mistake, and we lament, and now people are doubting me and not knowing. But remember, Krishna knows. Krishna always knows. It is the most comforting statement. He is all-pervading. He knows everything. What our intent was, how hard we were trying, what different circumstances we faced. So when we are not executing in perfection, there's no reason to lament, because Krishna knows truly that we were trying, that we're giving our effort. So we don't have to be in anxiety, wondering. Always have faith. Krishna knows everything, and he's always with us. And so there is nothing left to be unknown. It's a very nice position to be in with Krishna. 16. The supreme truth exists outside and inside of all living beings, the moving and the non-moving. Because he is subtle, he is beyond the power of the material senses to see or to know. Although far, far away, he is also near to all. So the Supersoul is inside and outside, right? Simultaneously near and far. How? Because he is residing in our hearts as Paramatma. And he's also residing in his original form in Goloka Vrindavan. So he is both near and far. Now, the Krishna says he is beyond the power of the material senses to see or know. Does that mean the knowable object, the object of knowledge, is unknowable? How can that be? We need to know this. So how can it be unknowable? So this Gayam, this object of knowledge, it's not knowable by our material senses. We cannot apply our material intelligence, our material senses to know. It is knowable by bhakti, devotional service. By hearing with devotion from transcendental sources, Guru Parampara, one purifies their senses to their original state, the original spiritual senses, and then one can see. So Prabhupada says very, very nicely in the purport, I'm just looking for the statement, but one who has purified his mind and senses by practicing Krishna consciousness in devotional service can see him constantly. So, yes, it is beyond the power of our material senses, but it is well within the reach of our spiritual senses. And those become awakened by the process of devotional service. So, this full knowledge, this supreme truth, it means to see the Supreme, to understand the Supreme everywhere, inside and out, moving and non-moving. This is the full and complete knowledge. Okay. 17. Although the Supersoul appears to be divided among all beings, he is never divided. He is situated as one. Although he is a maintainer of every living entity, it is to be understood that he devours and develops all. So a couple of very important points here Krishna is making. Again, describing this second object of knowledge, the Supersoul, giving some very good details for us. So the Supersoul, how it can be present everywhere, in every living entity, but not be divided. If I want to be in two places, I have to divide myself into two. 50% here, 50% there. If I want to be in four places, I have to divide into four and 25% in each of the four locations. That is because we are limited. But Krishna is unlimited. So while he is present everywhere, he is never divided. He is situated as one. So simultaneously he is present in the spiritual world as Krishna. Yet his reflective expansion is present everywhere in the hearts of everyone as Paramatma. So let's unpack that a little bit. An analogy first. An analogy is given that a sun is shining from one place, yet many people are experiencing this sunlight on their head. Sun is one, but thousands of people can be experiencing sunlight. Another example is given of the moonlight. If you have 10 pots of water and the moon is out, the moon will be seen in each of those 10 pots of water. So that reflection is seen. So similarly, the Paramatma in our heart, it is a reflective expansion of Kshirodakshayi Vishnu. So Kshirodakshayi Vishnu is situated in Shvetadvip, in the material creation. And his reflected expansion is the Paramatma within all of our hearts. So it is not divided, but it is the reflective, just like the moon reflecting in 10 pots of water. Right? So Krishna is never divided. He is always one. So we have to understand this how he can simultaneously be present everywhere, yet situated, undivided as one in the spiritual world. So this is how it happens. The second statement Krishna makes in this purport, in the verse, Krishna is not only the maintainer, but he's also the destroyer and creator. So the cycle of creation and maintenance and destruction, it all happens ultimately under the jurisdiction of Krishna. Yes, there may be secondary creators, secondary destroyers, but Krishna is the ultimate cause of all creation, maintenance, and destruction. So he is clarifying that point here in 17. Okay, 18. He is the source of light in all luminous objects. He is beyond the darkness of matter and is unmanifested. He is knowledge. He is the object of knowledge. He is the goal of knowledge. He is situated in everyone's heart. So kind of the conclusive statement of the super soul for this section. He is everything. He is the ultimate object of knowledge. Gyayam. Of the two Gyayams, Jiva and super soul, the super soul is the ultimate object of knowledge. Knowing just Jiva is helpful, but not completely sufficient, because one needs to know the relationship to the Supreme. He is the source of all light. Krishna is the source of all light. The Brahmajyoti illuminates all of the spiritual world, and also is a source of light for the light within the material world. The sun gets its light ultimately from the energy of Krishna. When we plug in a lamp into the light socket, that light ultimately comes from the sun because it's coming from some power that is created by some type of organic fuel that is developed by the presence of the sun. So ultimately, Krishna is the source of all lights. Okay? And finally, as we've been discussing and Krishna has been repeating for emphasis, he is situated in all of our hearts as supreme controller. His arms and legs are everywhere, but the jiva is limited. So Prabhupada says in this purport very nicely at the very end, so there is no denying the fact that the supreme supersoul and the individual soul are always different. We must leave this section with the conclusive understanding that there are two objects of knowledge, soul and supersoul. They are not one. The soul will never become the supersoul. One is limited and one is unlimited. And that is a foundational understanding, because many commentators on these verses merge the two for some satisfaction of ulterior motive. But that is not the case. And Prabhupada ends that purport with a very strong statement. No denying the fact that they are two. Okay? 19. Final verse for today. Thus the field of activities, the body, knowledge, and knowable have been summarily described by me. Only my devotees can understand this thoroughly and thus attain to my nature. So how to know the unknowable? How to understand the object of knowledge? What is the qualification? Unalloyed devotion. Only the devotees can fully understand this. Others will be confused. There will be so much speculation, but there will be no conclusion. There will be only left of incomplete satisfaction for having understood. Unless one comes to devotional service, this is the only means to understand this. It is the only means. And Prabhupada writes, what is knowledge? In other words, knowledge is nothing but the preliminary stage of understanding devotional service perfectly. It's a very beautiful statement that Prabhupada makes. He says this knowledge is of three things: the knower, the knowable, and the process of knowledge. Right? But really, in the end, knowledge is nothing but the preliminary stage of understanding devotional service perfectly. That is knowledge. Couldn't be summed up any more succinctly or precisely. It is devotional service. So here, up to this point now, Krishna has described the kshetra, the field. He has described the process to understand this knowledge. That was verses 8 through 12. And he has described the soul and the super soul, both as kshetragya, the knower, and the object of knowledge, the gya. So this is where Krishna has left off. And so now the remaining verses will discuss the remaining topics, including the nature, how the body is constituted, the purusha, and several other topics. Okay? So thank you very much. Srila Prabhupada ki jai, Ananta Koti Vaishnavinda ki jai. Any questions or comments today?
Hare Krishna Prabhuji, Dhanvi Pranam Prabhuji, Honorable Sister Prabhuji. Thank you so much for a wonderful lecture, Prabhuji. Last statement of yours, knowledge is nothing but it's a preliminary stage of understanding devotional service perfectly. So we are talking about knowledge here as the material knowledge here. What knowledge are we talking? Could you just elaborate?
No, because remember, material knowledge has no value, ultimately. It has no, Prabhupada says, it has no real value. Because you can simply learn how to manipulate matter, but one will achieve no real progress. Knowledge is meant to achieve progress. Right? We celebrate knowledge. What we know today versus what we know 100 years ago is a celebration of advancement in knowledge. And that, in theory, should give us some ability to do something we could not do previously. But ultimately, knowledge is meant to give happiness. Right? We are searching for knowledge. We're searching how to manipulate matter to find happiness. But we know, from top to bottom, there's only suffering in the material world. So that knowledge, material knowledge, will never bring about the desired result. So spiritual knowledge is the only knowledge that will bring about the desired result, which is happiness and bliss. So Prabhupada then is saying that knowledge is nothing but the preliminary stage of understanding devotional service. It means devotional service, this spiritual knowledge, is the only knowledge that really is going to help us achieve our goals. So when he described the process of knowledge in verse 8 through 12, clear. This is not knowledge of how to manipulate matter. It has nothing to do with the body. It is spiritualized. So, but to summarize knowledge, spiritual knowledge, it becomes somewhat, it can become sometimes, hard to organize. So the precise understanding is, it's nothing but coming to the point of devotional service. Knowledge that I am soul, Krishna is the Supreme Lord, and the relationship between me and him is bhakti. That's knowledge. You can sum up all knowledge into those three things. Who am I? Who is Krishna? And what is my relationship? So that is the purport of that statement.
Basically, that knowledge which will ultimately get us to do devotional service. That's the only knowledge of the value, correct, in a way?
Yeah.
Are you saying that?
Yeah. And we can think about it, right? What is the value of knowing how to acquire millions of dollars? Is it going to give me eternal happiness? No. What is the value of knowing how to solve, some disease? Is it going to give me eternal happiness? No. What is the value of knowing how to drive a very fast sports car? Is it going to give me eternal happiness? No. What is the value of knowing I am part and parcel of Krishna. And Krishna is my supreme loving Father. And I have this eternal relationship of devotion and service to Him. What is the value of that? Eternal bliss and happiness. That is the result. Brahma Bhuta Prasanatma. When one realizes the self, one becomes fully joyful immediately. So we know the value of all other knowledge. It doesn't result in our desired goal. But this knowledge is the only knowledge that results. And that's why Krishna said in that in the 12th verse, he says, besides this, whatever there may be is ignorance. It's a very exclusive, saying everything else is not really knowledge. Because ultimately it won't result in the desired goal. So, it's okay?
Yeah, thank you so much for your Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna Prabhu, Dandavad Pranam.
Hare Krishna. Dhanyavad.
All glories to your explanation, Prabhu, so crystal clear. No questions, Prabhu. Thank you very much for all summary studies for us. Thank you. We are fortunate enough.
Hare Krishna. Thank you. Okay, if we have nothing else, then we'll conclude here. So, thank you everyone very much. Srila Prabhupada ki jai, Ananta Koti Vaishnava Vrinda ki jai. Hare Krishna.